Our key guest today and the speaker of today is General Ben Hodges. His life is connected with every major US and NATO military engagement in the last 30 years since we started our Czech road into NATO. Was serving in Germany many times, was serving in Korea, was serving in major wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where we had the privilege to serve under him. And he finished his splendid military career as the Supreme Commander of the US military forces in Europe. Just recently, Ben Hodges published a new book, a venture done in a cooperation with another outstanding military personnel, John Allen, who was the commander in Afghanistan, and I remember him very well. And the third co-author of the book is Julian Lidley-French, so the very well-known British expert on NATO and security affairs, whom I known since 30 years, because he was also present from the King's College and other institution at the debate on the NATO enlargement. So the book, which is titled The Future War, Defense of Europe, so something what really we are interested in both, what is to be the future war, because a lot of things are changing in the current globally interconnected world, but one thing is still certain, that there are the bastards who wants to make us weaker, and then we need to stay strong to be able to cope with those new challenges or all new challenges. And secondly, defense of Europe. Of course, there's a lot of questions, to how long we can rely on the US commitment. We certainly here in the center of Europe are especially interested in keeping the transatlantic link strong, because in any major conflict, even the verbal one, we recognize that Europe is still very weak to cope with the challenges like China or Russia just alone. What we should do to improve the military mobility in Europe, including the mobility of the US Armed Forces. And right now, there is the convoy which is crossing the Czech Republic territory. And I think that we have learned a lot of lessons, because, did you notice some conflict or something? No, it goes very smoothly, and thank you very much, because it's also your contribution to that. So, just once again, I want also to thank to our sponsors, to make this debate lively and real. So let me thank, according to alphabet group, Czechoslovak Group, the very important company in the military industry, Czech group or Česká zbrojovka group, just purchased the Colt company in the United States. So, that's the other form of acquisition, not that the US are acquiring something here, that we are acquiring something there. And finally, EPF Foundation, which is a major financial group, and we are really happy to extend the cooperation with all three. And that's the end. That's the end for my introduction. And Ben, now floor is yours.
A slight correction. I was the commander of U.S. Army in Europe, and General Breedlove and Admiral Stavridis and General Scaparrotti, they were my boss, and so they would not be happy if they thought that I was in Prague advertising that I was the supreme commander. Okay, so just to be clear, I had a boss in Stuttgart. I would also say that all of the problems, the threats to our security existed before COVID, They're still here. The Kremlin and the Chinese Communist Party clearly were unimpeded by COVID. And we see the evidence of that all around us. So that's why I think it's important that we support efforts of our allies to continue to invest in security, because the threats are still there. And all of us, we discovered we have some vulnerabilities, certainly in the United States, but here throughout Europe, vulnerabilities in our society, vulnerabilities that will be exploited by adversaries if we are not prepared, if we don't push back. And unless you were in a cave, you saw in the last 48 hours the kind of activities that are still out there when in another European country, Belarus, does what it did. And that was intended not just because they wanted that young man, but because they wanted to send a message to every journalist, that every opposition member, everybody that has a protest against autocratic regimes, you're not safe. That was the message from Minsk, and why we have to be prepared and respond to that. And obviously the Czech Republic has issued a strong condemnation. The EU probably acted as fast as they've ever acted here in the last 24 hours. And I hope that this will continue. What's missing is no condemnation from Moscow or of Moscow. But all of you know that the air defense system of Belarus is completely integrated into the Russian air defense. So it's impossible that this happened without the Kremlin being aware of it. Impossible. So I think everybody was quick to condemn Belarus, but I think we need to make sure that the Kremlin does not feel that they're have nothing to do with this. The main thing I would want to leave with you is that I know that the Czech Republic is an important ally for the United States, is a long-standing friendship. When the first Dragoon convoy came from the Baltics all the way back through Poland and then Czech Republic to go home to Vilsek, I was still the commander, and I was getting reports, hey, you know, yeah, no problems in Poland, no problems in Lithuania, but we think there are going to be massive protests inside the Czech Republic. And I'm like, whew, that doesn't sound good. But Ambassador Shapiro said, don't worry, you can count on the Czechs. So we continued on. Where do you think we had the biggest crowds of supporters and people waving flags? It was right here. Ambassador Shapiro sent me a picture. He said, hey, the big demonstration I told you about, here's a picture of it. And there were 3 people outside the U.S. Embassy with a little Charlie Brown flag. Then there were tens of thousands of Czech citizens surrounding our soldiers and welcoming them there. And there was an older gentleman. Now that I'm 63, I'm careful in what I call old. My standard has changed. But an older gentleman who would have been a boy during the war came up to the regimental commander, and he had an old-style American baseball glove, you know, the leather that has the big fingers, and he gave it to the regimental commander, and the Colonel John Meyer, said, wow, this is a really a famous-looking old glove. What's the story? He said, an American soldier gave it to me in 1946, and I've been waiting 70 years to give it back. I mean, I get even telling that story again, and I've told it many times, I still feel it. And my president has indicated from the very first day when President Biden was inaugurated, he talked about allies, the importance of allies, how the United States needs allies. Even with the biggest defense budget in history, we do not have the capacity to do everything that we have to do to protect our interests, to protect our friends, and to protect our own people. We need allies. And when those threats I talked about, they're still out there. For sure, the Chinese Communist Party, I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're going to be in a kinetic conflict in the next 5 years with China. And we do not have the ability to do that and deter Russia and contain Iran and worry about North Korea and protect the global commons. Can't do it. So we have to have allies. And that's why the president has emphasized allies. That's why he called Secretary General Stoltenberg in the first couple of days he was in office. That's why Secretary of Defense Austin called, on his first day in the job, called Secretary General Stoltenberg and said, you can count on the United States. So that's what I want, the main thing I would want you to be confident in is that the United States, from a philosophical standpoint, values our allies. And of course, what you hear from the administration and from Secretary Blinken and other leaders in the administration is the importance of liberal democracy and democracies working together. When I first heard that, I was kind of like, okay. But now as I read more and hear more and see the manifestations of that, understand how that helps bind us, you can disagree with policy, or you can be unhappy about certain decisions. I'm unhappy about a couple of decisions already. But the idea of the values that keep us together, that's legitimate. That's solid. That's what's going to help us get through when we do have arguments and disappointments. And for sure, we will disappoint you, just like perhaps occasionally the Czech Republic might disappoint us. Sasha did mention the convoys that are passing through for the Steadfast Defender 21 exercise. Thank you very much for that. For the soldiers, this is so important to be able to demonstrate that they can move as fast or faster than Russian Federation forces came. This is about deterrence. This is about giving political leaders options other than a liberation campaign. We want to prevent the conflict from happening. And if the Kremlin sees that they can do something, say in the Suwalki corridor, for example, in Lithuania or Romania, or perhaps even up in Norway, in the high north, before we could get there, they've demonstrated that they're willing to do anything if they can get there before us, and then wait to see if we actually are going to do something. So that's why this military mobility is so important. That's why the movement of these soldiers from Vilsek through the Czech Republic is so important. And I think, and seeing General Zhuna here, I know that one of the things that the Czech Republic has done that is so important is improving host nation support. Now, I'm speaking to my friends in the Czech Republic here, our NATO ally. The United States, of course, has expectations. Of course we do. I'm sure many of you are relieved. You know, President Trump, American president, he was unpredictable very often, and he cast doubt on the alliance, which was unfortunate. And so there probably was relief. Where I live in Frankfurt, I could hear people breathing a sigh of relief all the way from Berlin as well as Paris and Brussels. The style is going to be different, but the amount of pressure is going to be the same. You can be sure that the Biden administration is going to put pressure to make it clear what American expectations are of all of our allies. Not to do what the U.S. says, but to live up to what you said you were going to do. 2% obviously is a part of that. I think the Czech Republic is on track by 2024 to be at 2% of GDP. Now, is that because the GDP is shrinking and you're going to meet it there? Or is it because of a sustained commitment by an ally to do its part? This is important. And of course, the Czech Republic has committed to field an armored brigade with over 200 armored fighting vehicles by 2026. That's a big deal. That's significant. It's expensive, but it's important. When I look at the map, and I'm an old person, I still like to look at maps. When I see the map, of course, people focus on the Baltic region, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and then our friends in the Black Sea region are saying, hey, we have a border with Russia too, it's called the Black Sea. And that's actually the place where Russia uses force still. And you could almost imagine that there's a new Iron Curtain across the Black Sea where they use force against Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, obviously, and other means of leverage against our allies, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. But in the middle is the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So the Czech Republic and Slovakia is the hinge. It's the ability of the alliance to go north or to go south, whatever the threat is. That's an important role that you have. So having troops that you can contribute to NATO requirements, but host nation support is so important. and improving the infrastructure that allows movement by heavy forces is essential. And I think, frankly, at NATO, that we should seriously consider investment in infrastructure, transportation capacity that has military value. Maybe that should be counted towards 2% as well to incentivize people to invest more. I'm almost at my 15 minutes. Let me touch one more point that I wanted to say. Look, of course I'm going to tell you, I hope that the Czech Republic makes sure that Russia and China cannot compete or be a part of the nuclear power project in Dukovny. Of course I'm going to tell you that, because I think it would be a disaster. And of course I'm going to tell you that I don't think that the Chinese should be allowed to touch your 5G network at all. They absolutely should not. But you're an ally. And I don't like it if my country just comes and beats on our ally and says, you can't do this, you can't do this. It's clear you shouldn't, but I would rather that we compete. Let American business, other countries, let us compete and come up with a better solution that's affordable for a 5G network. It's not like only the Chinese know how to do it. We know how to do it, the Swedes know how to do it, the Finns know how to do it. We've got to come up with a way where we can provide that 5G network that we all want and that we all need. And the same thing with nuclear power. I'm sure that the United States can come up with the best solution for you. And I'd rather us win it by competing versus saying you can't or shouldn't let somebody else do it. So Peter Duran, our friend from SEPA that used to be at SEPA, he told me, he said, great power competition prevents great power conflict. If you compete in diplomacy, you compete in information, you compete in the economy, not just military, you actually are conveying to potential adversaries that we care about this. This is important to us. And that actually lowers the risk of somebody making a terrible miscalculation.
You are living in Frankfurt. What's the future of American forces in Germany?
So, of course, about a year ago, the previous administration announced, it was quite a surprise, that about 12,000 American soldiers were going to come out of Europe, most of them out of Germany. This caught all the American commanders by surprise, as well as our host nation, Germany, and the Congress, called the Congress totally by surprise as well. The new administration has canceled that, so everything that's in Germany now is staying. Of course, it will always be subject to the usual global force posture review, the normal process. But the withdrawal that the previous administration announced, that has been canceled. And in fact, Secretary Austin announced when he was in Stuttgart a few weeks ago that 500 more American soldiers are coming to Germany. These were a headquarters for fire support, and then a headquarters for what we call the multi-domain task force, which will help with actually countering hybrid warfare threats. So permanent troops coming into Germany.
Or what's the future of U.S. forces in Poland?
My estimate is everything that's in Poland now, in Lithuania, in Romania, in Bulgaria, that's all going to stay, but it's all rotational. The Armor Brigade combat team that comes over from the States for 9 months, and it's split between Lithuania, Poland, and Romania and Bulgaria. Logisticians, aviation, Air Force, all rotational. But at the levels that we see now, I expect that to continue, with the possible exception, the Army is under huge pressure. I mean, they are, even coming out of Afghanistan, the Army's under huge pressure. And so the Chief of the Army would like to reduce the amount of time, instead of coming 9 months, what we call heel to toe, continuous. There might be gaps there. I don't know. That's certainly not what the commander of U.S. European Command wants. But in terms of overall capability, that's going to stay. And we just deployed, our great Air Force just deployed a squadron of MQ-9 Reaper which is the high-altitude drone, is now based in Câmpia Torzi in Romania. And I think the Air Force is significantly growing its capability in Romania as well. So, increase in Germany and maintaining the capabilities that we have in Eastern Europe. And then, of course, you saw, I think the Navy is looking to grow its capability infrastructure up in Norway.
My question is on Russia. Just Biden administration came twice this year on my radar screen. First time it was the rhetorics about a killer, Putin as a killer guy. Secondly, it was just recently a lifting of sanction on the Nord Stream to pave the road for what? So just now there was the announcement of the summit meeting in Geneva in the middle of June, I think June 16. So first question is what we can expect in between, this killer kind of a rhetoric and lifting Nord Stream section praxis on the other hand. So what we can expect in between. And secondly, to what extent the current American thinking about Russia is influenced by the challenge of China?
So I owe you the courtesy and respect of being totally honest with you. I'm very disappointed with the last couple of weeks how the administration has responded to Russia. The offer of a summit, the two U.S. Navy ships that were headed to the Black Sea and then turned around, the decision to waive the sanctions, two specific sanctions on Nord Stream 2 AG and on Mr. Varnik, the CEO. The other sanctions remained in place, but what I think was a significant error in strategic communications, they didn't have to announce the other part. Instead, that became the whole focus. And so there's like 3 or 4 gifts that have been given unearned to the Kremlin. I was encouraged at first when I heard the famous, yes, of course he's a killer. And I hope that somebody will ask President Biden that again. Do you still think he's a killer? And I was encouraged when I heard the president say that when he had his phone call with President Putin, he said the sovereignty of Ukraine is a priority for the United States. That was powerful, but that's a policy statement, and there's no strategy that underpins that, unfortunately. As we saw during Russia's threatening movements all around Ukraine. By the way, only about 20% of those Russian forces ever went back after Minister Shoigu said, okay, good job, guys, everybody go back to barracks. Almost everything is still there. And I would predict come August or September, it's going to heat up again significantly in Ukraine. The Russians, they never back up. They pause and then they keep going. I'm worried that the administration is doing some things that they're either falling into the trap that the Trump administration and the Obama administration and the Bush administration did, which was to believe that somehow we could reason with the Kremlin and that there was a win-win opportunity. And I don't think that the president of the Russian Federation cares about or wants a win-win, only a win. And so I hope that the administration will not go down that reset path. Certainly the Congress is tough on the Kremlin, and I think the Congress, including the Democrats, are going to wait, have expectations of a tougher approach to Russia. I think that the administration realizes how important Germany is as an ally, as the leader inside the European Union, and that we need Germany to put pressure on the Kremlin, and especially to put pressure on China, because so much of the EU Germany can influence what the EU does. So I'm thinking that that's part of the reason that the administration was soft on Nord Stream 2. I don't know, of course. I hope that there are discussions between Berlin and Washington about, okay, here, this, and this, here's our expectation of you. But as you know, Germany has elections in September. It will not be, for the first time in 16 years, it will not be Chancellor Merkel. So I don't know what the calculations are. Although it was interesting today, not Ms. Baerbock, but Habeck, the gentleman from the Greens, said that he thinks that Germany should give weapons to Ukraine, which is not a very traditional green approach, but it's certainly an encouraging one. But the other part of your question is this approach towards Russia, is that influenced by China? I would imagine there has to be considerations there. Everybody in the administration has talked about China as the long-term strategic rival, and it feels like they would like to not have to worry about Russia, not have to worry about Europe, and be able to focus on China. And that means they're going to have strong cooperation with the European Union to compete economically. And I think that has to be factoring in, because most of the EU, certainly in Western Europe, you know better than me, is all about dialogue with Russia, don't provoke, that sort of attitude.
Is Ukraine better prepared to cope with some aggression than 5 years ago? No?
Yeah, this is a completely different story in Ukraine today. Ukraine still has significant problems, significant challenges, but this is not the same Ukraine that Russia came in and ran them out of Crimea. It is a different Ukrainian armed forces, at least on land forces. Air Force would be shot down immediately. Russian air defense systems, as we all know, are so capable. The Navy, I think, would have a really difficult time if it ventured out to take on the Black Sea Fleet in a conventional sort of way. But the land forces have significantly improved. I think that some of the capabilities that the United States has helped provide, like the counter-fire radar, for example, night vision devices, secure communications, those are helpful. But Ukraine, you know, that was the heart of the Soviet Union's defense industry was in Ukraine. They know how to make stuff. So I think what Ukraine needs from the United States and from the West is very, very public support, affirming that we are never going to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, and we're going to do that not just verbally, but in legal terms and diplomatic terms. And we're never going to recognize the idea of Luhansk or Donetsk as being somehow separate. I think the United States will hopefully appoint a special envoy to Minsk, because I have zero confidence in Berlin or Paris that they're going to ever hold the Kremlin accountable there.
What would be your advice to the new German Green Chancellor, if it's her or him, what kind of weapons to send to Ukraine?
I think that they do need help with being able to knock down drones. They do need not Navy, but the ability to threaten Russian ships in their illegal base in Sevastopol. I mean, with long-range fires, the Navy has started developing unmanned systems, so drones for the water, which are really, really effective against submarines, mines, sea mines. These are the kind of things that Ukraine cannot make for themselves necessarily, that would change the dynamic a little bit in Sea of Azov and in particular around Crimea.
You mentioned the Armored Brigade and the promise of 2026 of the 210 APCs. What would be your message to Czech Czech politicians and to the new Czech government after the elections, or old new Czech government after the elections, and the parliament, in order not to play with the idea that it's a good promise, but it's not so necessary.
What was it that we all saw a few weeks ago in Ukraine that got everybody's attention? It was tanks and artillery and paratroopers. That's what was on the TV all the time, and people were terrified there was going to be another conflict. So it was the Russian steel, real capability, armored vehicles, airborne, and Navy, conventional stuff. That's what had everybody's attention. And so the Russian way of war is not just, I mean, hybrid does not mean just cyber, just disinformation, just little green men. It's the whole range of things, from nuclear weapons to tens of thousands of armored vehicles and soldiers, and all the other stuff. So as long as our adversaries or our threats have those capabilities, you're going to have the ability to counter that. So my message to the political leadership in the Czech Republic would be, don't be confused that, okay, that's old stuff, now we're going to focus on the future and it's just cyber and it's just drones, because that's absolutely not the future of just those things. The second thing I would say is you've made a commitment, and to have a seat at the table as a reliable ally, you have to live up to commitments. And this commitment to have an armor brigade, that is real capability. Chances are it won't have to fight inside the Czech Republic. That's not the point. It's being able to contribute to what the alliance needs is what matters. And then my third point I would make is the women and men in uniform of Czech armed forces deserve to have the best equipment available. Yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the sinking of the HMS Hood. This was the pride of the Royal Navy. I mean, it was the ship that everybody pointed to, and it was destroyed in less than 10 minutes by the German battleship Bismarck, which was state of the art. So 1,403 sailors died in less than 10 minutes because they were sailing around in old technology that was destroyed by new technology. Now, as you know, a couple of days later, the Bismarck was sunk by technology, which were airplanes that could now sink ships. The point is, you cannot afford not to modernize. Otherwise, the courage of your women and men in uniform will not make up that difference.
My question relates to massive military buildup that we saw last week around Ukraine. Would you expect also some lessons, let's say, in force posture or on our mechanisms on our side?
Part of our problem is that so many, certainly in the United States, but I think in most of Western Europe, is disbelief that the Kremlin would actually do some of these things. I mean, we try to put our mental, or we try to look at what they're doing through our eyes and like, okay, well, this makes no sense. So why would they do that? I mean, I hear Germans all the time, what are you talking about? They will never do that. Okay, and I have not met a single person yet that claimed, I told you they were going to invade Crimea. I mean, they surprise us all the time because we refuse to believe that they might actually use force against a European country in the year 2021. That's why we're on the back foot all the time. And so being more realistic, and by the way, it's very difficult, and I know I'm surrounded by politicians right now. If an elected official says something is a threat, then you have to do something about it. When you acknowledge a threat, you have to do something. And I think that's why there's a reluctance in many capitals to acknowledge the threat. So that's part of the problem. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he said, What are you so concerned about? With all your American technology, surely you can see everything that the Russians have. You're right, we can see almost everything, but we still don't know what the hell they're going to do. That's the hard part. That's what are the intentions? And what I have discovered, this will not be a surprise to you, but our allies and partners that live along the border with Russia and in the Black Sea region will know so much more about what Russia's doing than we would know with 1,000 satellites. So changing the policies that allow us to share intelligence better if I was king for a day, that's the first thing I would do is get rid of Five Eyes and instead figure out how do we use technology to share intelligence while still protecting all of our networks. That is a gap that allows us to be surprised. And then the third sort of part of this, I think, this is where quantum computing, I think, is going to help us figure out intentions. I mean, the business world uses that to anticipate the future already. And I think if there are military applications for quantum computing that can help determine what the Kremlin is thinking about doing, I think we have a chance to improve our ability to guess those intentions. It was amazing how many people were like, oh, thank God, the crisis is over in Ukraine. Those second lieutenants know that the crisis is not over, that all the stuff is still there. The Navy is still there. The Black Sea is still shut down. And this water crisis in Crimea, it's only going to be worse in August than it is right now. And I would predict that we're going to be watching Russian troops again in August, and people are going to be surprised again.
What Biden's administration wants to do with, let's say, allies and for allies in Europe. And second question, if you would take today what's in Europe on NATO side and compare it to what Russians are able to do from your point of view, would you say that we are behind them or we are equal from military, let's say purely military point of view?
First of all, on the budget, of course, the administration, I think, just rolled out their first defense budget, and there's definitely not going to be growth. I think the Army is probably feeling, the U.S. Army is feeling the most pressure, but all the services are going to feel some pressure. Fortunately, the Congress most of the Congress still supports, for a variety of reasons, a strong military budget or a robust military budget. But you're right. I mean, during the campaign and as soon as the president took office, he talked about COVID, fixing the economy. A lot of money has been handed out. And I don't disagree with the policy, but that's still money that's coming from somewhere. And infrastructure requirements in the United States are significant. So there is a real political battle that's going to happen here over the next year and a half. I'm sure you know that the administration has a paper-thin majority in the House, and it's 50-50 in the Senate. And so he doesn't have a big mandate in terms of congressional support. So he's got to address a lot of different constituencies and get support. And so far, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of bipartisan effort coming from the Republican side. So American politics, domestic politics, is obviously going to affect part of what you're talking about. Still, I am heartened that the administration announces increase of U.S. troops in Europe. This Defender exercise that's underway is a massively expensive exercise. None of that was canceled. So I think that they're going to try and figure out how do we maintain, because we have real threats to deal with. In terms of a comparison, clearly there's 3 or 4 areas where we have a huge advantage. First of all, we have 29 allies. Russia has 0 allies. Nobody wants to be on their team. Belarus is a vassal. Serbia just took delivery of some tanks. But in terms of allies, where, no kidding, people are committed to each other. Our great alliance, with all of its problems and all of its challenges, is by far the most successful alliance in the history of the world. And there are countries lined up wanting to join NATO despite its challenges. So that's our number 1 advantage. And that's not a bumper sticker. I believe that with every fiber of my being. Second advantage that we have, of course, is when we do work together, the combined air forces, the combined capabilities, the combined navies, our special forces, the capability that's there, when it works together, it dwarfs whatever the Russians could put against us. And of course, that's the challenge. That's why they will never go for a scenario where it's them against 30. Instead, it's trying to stay below the threshold of Article 5, try to exploit cracks in the cohesion, try to create situations where countries in other parts of Europe would say, you know, those guys in Latvia, they treat their ethnic Russians like crap anyway. We don't want to get into a nuclear war because of that. Or Romania, come on. So that's what we have to watch for. Now, what advantage do the Russians have? Right now, they have the advantage in the Arctic. From the airfield up there, you could reach New York in 2 hours with a Russian bomber. The second place where they have an advantage is in the Black Sea. The Black Sea has not been a high enough priority for the United States or for NATO, and so we don't have ships in there constantly. Even within the constraints of the Montreux Convention, we're not even close to doing what we could within Montreux. And I would say we, the United States, have got a lot of work to do with Turkey to fix that relationship. Turkey is a very frustrating ally, but they're still an extremely important ally, and we have not managed that relationship very well. We've got to fix that. Otherwise, the Russians will continue to have the advantage of being able to use the Black Sea as a launching pad into the Middle East, into the Caucasus, into the Balkans. And then finally, I think where I'm very concerned is something, and I remember you and I down by the river one day, and Thomas, you were there, and we were talking about the disappointment of the United States decision to not invest in air and missile defense here in the Czech Republic. This is our biggest vulnerability, I think, in Europe, is air and missile defense. I mean, there's one American Patriot battalion for all of Europe. And of course, it will go straight to Ramstein if there's a crisis, to protect Ramstein. So who's protecting all the other vulnerable critical infrastructure? European citizens. Who's protecting that? The 2 Aegis systems in Romania and Poland, the one in Poland is still not operational yet, and those would be overwhelmed if it was a Russian attack. Germany and the Netherlands, I think, have got to take on a lot more responsibility. So instead of just pounding the Germans on 2%, say, it's your damn job to provide air and missile defense for the whole Baltic region. Figure it out. And it doesn't have to be Patriot. I mean, I'd be happy if it was Patriot, but it doesn't have to be Patriot, but figure it out. Take that responsibility to protect European citizens.
What do you think West's response should be after the recent action of Lukashenko?
I have to give credit to the Union for how quickly they agreed on sanctions, on what appear to be very significant sanctions and restrictions on Belarus here within 24 hours. That's important. I think that finding ways to, the way Lithuania, frankly, has done such a good job of being a voice to support to support the opposition, to encourage democracy, to refuse to acknowledge Mr. Lukashenko as the legitimate president. These kind of things are important steps, but it can't be just Lithuania. It has to be all of Europe. The third thing, though, is, as I mentioned earlier, there's no condemnation of the Kremlin. I mean, it's like everybody is reluctant, not everybody, many nations, particularly Germany and France, even UK, are reluctant to criticize the Kremlin. But Belarus, everybody piled on them immediately. But I don't believe that Belarus, I don't think the Kremlin told Lukashenko, do this. But there's no way they could have done it without the Kremlin knowing about it and approving it and allowing it to happen. And in effect, this now brings Belarus even closer to the Kremlin, which of course is what the Kremlin always wanted to. He's not after the Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to make sure that everybody on his frontier cannot integrate to the West. So I think the real pressure should be on the Kremlin, not just on Belarus. Now, I'm going to sound a little bit hypocritical here, or I'm going to try to have it both ways. I was willing to be tolerant of some things from Belarus over the last few years, as long as they kept Russian ground troops out of Belarus. As long as there were no Russian forces stationed in Belarus, I thought, okay, that provides a little more security for Lithuania and Poland. And so, of course, President Lukashenko would play both sides to sort of maintain that. But I think now he's gone beyond that point.
My first question goes to why, we see this erosion of willingness. I'm worried that we may be able to defend, but we may lose willingness. And that second question is, what are the capabilities in which we will bridge the old defense matters? Because we need them. We cannot give up on that. And what are the new capabilities and new institutional interagency arrangements, which are the challenge in these new dimensions of what we face?
I think 5,000 different German businesses that are in Russia. The biggest German embassy in the world is in Moscow. None of that's illegal, but it certainly influences everything that they do. And I'm sure you saw a few months ago the president of the Bundesrepublik, Steinmeier. I mean, he said, hey, look, he basically said we have to keep going with the Nord Stream 2 because, I mean, we're responsible for killing so many Russians during the war, and I mean, there's a certain guilt. I mean, what kind of logic is that? But there actually are millions of Germans that believe that. And so, and I think this comes to a lack of clear-eyed, cold-hearted strategic thinking and being honest about who the threats are. And even Chancellor Merkel, I mean, she's led big delegations to Beijing. She's the one that said, hey, that's business over here with Nord Stream, that's business. And I really thought after the Navalny poisoning, I thought that was going to be sort of the tipping point in German society. And for a couple of days it was, and then went back to normal. So I think our president, this may be why he's approached Germany the way he has, with a softer hand perhaps on Nord Stream 2, because we need Germany to have this sort of strategic debate about how they see their own role in the world. I don't think Germans trust themselves, actually. I don't think they trust themselves. That's why they have these huge debates about should you put weapons on drones, or should we still be part of the nuclear sharing, arrangement inside NATO. They just don't trust themselves. As far as what are the capabilities that the alliance needs, I did mention that the air and missile defense is one of those things, but more broadly, the the cyber protection of our societies, not just of military. I mean, every country is creating a cyber command or something like that, but those things really only they're focused on protecting defense capabilities. The cyber protection of infrastructure. I mean, who's responsible for the cyber protection of Václav Havel Airport? Who is that? I'm going to bet it's a vendor, a contractor. Who does he or she report to? I mean, to make sure that everybody meets the standard, or who's responsible for the cyber protection of the power generation for Czech Republic or in Slovakia. This is an area where our societies have got to improve resilience of infrastructure. You saw what happened in the U.S. just a couple of weeks ago with this Colonial Pipeline. I mean, if that had happened in August or July, when half of America's going on summer holiday, and I mean, that would have been a disaster. And maybe this was just a test, the practice run, to see how we respond to it. Again, I don't think this was some criminal gang that the Kremlin doesn't know who they are. I mean, I'd be skeptical of that too. So being able to identify and protect against those kinds of threats is important. And then finally, against disinformation. I mean, there's little centers of excellence and schools and things are springing up everywhere to counter disinformation. But the best way to counter disinformation is we have a better story to tell, and we have to tell our own story, which means we have to live up to our own talking points. You could have 1,000 centers of excellence for countering disinformation, and then the Russians just show the video of Americans assaulting our own capital on January the 6th. I mean, that undermines our own better story to tell. So I think the administration is correct to focus on, we've got to get our house in order if we want to compete in the information space.
When you think of this possibility of kinetic warfare within 5 years, where do you think that might happen, and what impact on thinking in Central Europe?
I don't imagine a scenario where you see European and American and Chinese forces somehow fighting in Europe. What I do worry about is because we have not competed to meet infrastructure requirements, you now have a significant Chinese investment all over Europe on transportation infrastructure. You know, there was an excellent map that I saw somewhere yesterday on Twitter, and it showed from Piraeus Port the network that goes all the way to Budapest, and that Budapest is the hub for the Chinese in Europe. And then, of course, in Duisburg in Germany, thousands of Chinese rail cars show up every week unloading product. None of that's illegal, but it is a heck of a vulnerability when you have a potential adversary that controls significant amounts of transportation infrastructure that we would have to use if there was a crisis with Russia. If we had to move quickly, I don't anticipate that Beijing and Moscow are in close cooperation. They certainly are not allies. I think China's waiting for the opportunity where they can get Siberia back, for example. But I could see them being opportunistic and taking advantage of that. So that is a real vulnerability that we have. And it's and I can understand why smaller countries would be looking for any investor to fix railroads, to fix bridges, to improve airports, which is why I think we failed to compete, and now we're dealing with that. I would certainly defer to Admiral Davidson, the outgoing commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, and his relief, who also said, I think they both said 6 years, they think it's a kinetic conflict. I believe that because the Chinese Communist Party saw that we did not do anything after they finally smashed Hong Kong. I mean, not even Great Britain did anything. They may have offered, instant visas or something, but the UK did nothing after Hong Kong got smashed. The Chinese see that. They see how ineffective we are at responding to what the Kremlin does. These islands, these artificial islands in the South China Sea, the Chinese fishing fleet is a paramilitary organization, or they are employed to occupy, to smash Vietnamese and Filipino fishing vessels. And then you saw just a few weeks ago, there were hundreds of Chinese fishing vessels kind of occupied one of these Philippine islands, and they said they were there because of bad weather. I mean, it's almost comical, the stuff they'll say, but they do it, and we don't do anything, we can't or don't do anything about it. And even when our great Navy sails through there on freedom of navigation or sails through the Taiwan Straits, they know, the Chinese know that we have nothing behind it. I mean, that's one ship. So we don't have enough naval capacity to maintain the dominance and maintain the advantage. And certainly the language coming out of Beijing about Taiwan is, every week is worse, increasingly threatening is not the right word, defiant. And I think at some point they are going to take a look and they're going to say, the U.S. can't do anything about it. I mean, when you've got retired admirals in professional journals are saying the Americans can't stand casualties, let's see what they do when they lose 5,000 sailors when we sink an aircraft carrier. I mean, I think the PLA wants actually to fight. We haven't fought the Chinese since 1953 in Korea. I think they actually are anxious to have that. So that's why I think it could be an incident, or it's going to be a challenge in South China Sea or Taiwan, but that's where I think how it would be sparked.
I would be interested in your thoughts in Afghanistan, the coalition pulling out of Afghanistan. Do you think it's the right time?
The right time was about 18 years ago. I mean, we had accomplished the original purpose in the first year, to kick out the Taliban, to kick out Al-Qaeda, so that Afghanistan was not the launching pad for terrorist attacks into the United States or into the homeland of our European allies. So if we'd have left in 2003, Afghanistan would not have been a wonderful place, but we should have left with the promise that we'll come back and smash you again if we have to. Instead, we took our eye off the ball, or we allowed ourselves to do what we often do, which is, we can make this better. And so we start doing the things to try to improve life in Afghanistan, and there's so many positive, understandable reasons for doing it, but this is not strategic thinking. And then, of course, in 2003, we invade Iraq. Now, I was a brigade commander at the time, a colonel, and part of this initial invasion of Iraq. And I remember thinking, like, well, what's the connection? But then I'd like, I don't care. My brigade, we're getting ready to deploy, and that became my focus. But even I was like, well, I don't get the connection. So the United States strategically made several mistakes at the time that I wish we could undo, but we didn't. And so now we're leaving. I think President Biden is right to say it's time to leave. I'm glad that he didn't do it just unilaterally, although notification and collaboration with allies was still not what it should have been. And the fact that all of our allies, including the Czech Republic, stayed with us in Afghanistan from the very beginning. 14 Czech soldiers killed, many more wounded and injured. It was time to go. Why now? I think the new president, he sees, if I don't do it now, it'll just get harder and harder to go. There was no obvious, no matter what we thought, that, okay, one more year and we'll be done. That's not true. The fact that we were never willing to do what was necessary in Pakistan to deny safe haven. And I don't think there's an example in history of a counterinsurgency that was defeated that had safe haven. And clearly Pakistan, Osama bin Laden was hanging out there. And ISI had no interest in seeing Afghanistan become stable and prosperous, because Pakistan doesn't want to have India on one side and Afghanistan on the other side. So it was in the interest of Pakistan that Afghanistan never be settled. And we were not willing to do what was necessary to put the pressure on them. And I think it was because, obviously, we were worried about Pakistan's nuclear weapons falling into the hands of extremists. And so if we're not going to do that, then we should quit sending young women and men into Afghanistan. And then finally, the other mistake that we made was we never raised taxes to pay for it. And so there was no pressure on any administration or on the Congress to finish this. So the administration never really had to explain why we're there and what the objective is in any meaningful way, because the average family didn't feel it. Unless they had a daughter or a son or a brother that was deployed, they didn't feel it. There was no pressure. So not paying the tax, not raising taxes to pay for that, I think was a significant mistake. For me personally, I was there for 15 months in Kandahar. In 2009, 2010, I was sure we had won. I mean, you could just feel it. Things in Kandahar were going great. And it's like, oh man, I think we're finally there. That was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And we're not. And so, my own emotion is melancholy. It's like, God damn it, we felt like we did so much, and casualties and trillions of dollars, and everybody put so much into it. Diplomats, contractors, uniforms, families, and then to leave with the job not being finished. And then also to anticipate what's going to happen, which is the final part of your question. First, I hope that all of us are making arrangements for anybody that was a translator or worked with us, that they're on the fast track to get a visa to leave if they want to. I worry about what's going to happen to women in Afghanistan. But I have a tiny little bit of optimism that the Taliban, that this is not the Taliban of 20 years ago, that they recognize they need a degree of political legitimacy. And I think they know that the United States will, in fact, come back in and smash or punish kinetically in certain circumstances. So I'm not completely, I don't think it's going to be like the Visigoths overrunning Rome in 2, 3, 4 years from now. I mean, for sure, Czech soldiers and American soldiers and other allies gave them the best possible opportunity. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Afghan army, police, security forces trained, government workers trained. I mean, at some point, they have to own it.
You mentioned that you are worried that by August or September there will be some, let's say, escalation around Ukraine. From the military point of view, what can be done to deter Russians from escalating?
First of all, for sure, the administration and heads of government from all of our allies have got to very publicly, very clearly continue to emphasize Ukrainian sovereignty is a priority. So there is a political, public aspect to this that we're never going to recognize Crimea, annexation of Crimea. We're never going to recognize any sort of separation of Luhansk and Donetsk. So this is important. It's got to be backed up, but it's got to be said over and over and very clear. That's important because that'll also give President Zelensky some confidence so that he doesn't take the bait, which the Russians keep putting out there, hoping that he'll attack, so that then they come in and and crush Ukrainian forces, which of course is what they're hoping for. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I would like to see the administration announce we have a strategy for the Black Sea region. I mean, everybody loves Ukraine from a moral standpoint, but nobody cares about it from a strategic standpoint, except because it's part of the Black Sea region and it's on the border of Russia. So from a strategic standpoint, it's kind of the keystone for the Black Sea, where I think the real competition with the Russian Federation forces is and where it's going to be, in the Black Sea region. This is of the most strategic importance to them, much more than the Baltic Sea. Arctic obviously is incredibly important to them, but the Black Sea, 90% of their grain export out through the Black Sea. All the weapons that they export to the Middle East through the Black Sea. It's the launching pad for everything that they do in the Caucasus, Middle East, and in the Balkans. So we've never competed there. We've never made it clear that the Black Sea is important to the United States or even to NATO. And so when I say compete, this is a diplomatic part, economic part, that we're going to compete there. And then we're going to have a strategy. And when you have a strategy, then you have to put resources against it and priorities. And then when you start getting U.S. Navy up in there, and the Royal Navy, and the German Navy, and the French Navy, and we start doing things to demonstrate, that would change the game a little bit. And then finally, I see Romania as our center of gravity for the Black Sea region. I mean, on any given day, there's about 1,000 American soldiers in Romania, both at MK, Michael Gonaciano, which is the biggest place, but I mentioned Câmpia Torții, this air base, and then you have the Aegis Ashore system there. I would keep pushing to grow capability in the based in Romania, to be able to threaten, to make the commander of the Black Sea Fleet feel very uncomfortable in his illegal base in Sevastopol.
We need the Americans who have the deep knowledge and insight of the European affairs and who are still ready to speak this openly and fight for what we believe in, and that's the transatlantic link and defense of Western world and Western democracies. And we cannot do this individually because the challenges are huge, and so thank you very much.
Thanks for the privilege.
Thank you.